Our internet is being super weird, so I'm actually sitting in a parking lot.
I can see that.
So, hi everybody. I am Lori, if you don't know me already, and I'm going to introduce in just a second here the excellent, amazing Dr. Sarah Myhill. I just wanted to let you know first that I am sitting in a parking lot, as you can probably see, because our internet is not doing so well right now. So it's raining here, and it's actually nice and sunny in the UK. Beautiful, so funny. So Dr. Sarah Myhill, since 1981 has focused tirelessly on identifying and treating the underlying causes of health problems, especially diseases of the civilization. So things that we experience here in the West, like chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalomyelitis, and now we get to welcome in long COVID. She's worked in the NHS and private practice for 17 years and was the honorary secretary of the British Society for Ecological Medicine, which is an amazing thing. If you don't have a doctor right now, if you're looking for a doctor, find doctors who are trained in ecological medicine, definitely. It focuses on the causes of disease and treating them through diet, supplements, and avoiding toxic stress. This is the way to go. Again, she's an expert in so many areas and authored the excellent book, which I was just telling her I had the pleasure of rereading over this past week. It's called Diagnosing Chronic Fatigue and Myalgic Encephalomyelitis. It's mitochondria, not hypochondria, which gives me goosebumps because, as many of you are finding out with long COVID, and if you've had chronic fatigue syndrome for a while, you know that a lot of people just don't understand what's going on and think that it's all in your head. They think it's psychological. So, Dr. Myhill, welcome. What I'd like to start off with here is actually to ask you about these terms that we use.
Okay.
Yeah, so myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, long COVID, are they all the same thing?
Okay.
Or
the important thing is to distinguish between clinical pictures and the mechanisms which cause them. So chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, long COVID, they are simply clinical pictures which beg the question why. Now let's start off with chronic fatigue syndrome. We all have a certain amount of energy to spend in a day. Let's call it a bucket of energy. Let's say it's worth £1,000 or whatever. If we spend more than that energy, if you've got £1,000 in the bank and you spend £1,010, you will die. Because if you don't have the energy to spend on the heart working, the brain working, the liver working, then they will stop and you will die. So the point here is that whatever that bucket of energy happens to be, the brain and the body cannot allow you to overspend for very good reasons. So we're spending energy all the time. We're spending energy just staying alive. That's called basal metabolic rate. And about 2/3 of all the energy that we generate just goes in staying alive. And then we have energy left to have a life with, which we spend mentally, we spend it physically, we spend it emotionally. But if that energy gap narrows, if it happens that the energy that we spend starts to get close to that total energy bucket, the body and the brain has to slow us down. It has to stop us spending energy. And the way it does that is by giving us symptoms. And those are very nasty symptoms. They're the sort of symptoms that will stop athletes winning marathon races. Severe muscle pain in the legs, for example. That's that symptom being fatigued. So if energy delivery to the body is impaired, then we slow down, we can't go faster, we have to stop and take a breath, and some patients have to rest up in bed. If energy delivery to the brain slows up, then that will result in foggy brain, cannot think clearly, poor short-term memory, difficult problem solving, and so on. And if you've got poor energy delivery to the heart, then the blood pressure will start to fall and the body will compensate initially by the pulse running a little bit faster. So the point is we have symptoms which are very unpleasant, but they stop us from dying. And that's a very important thing to do. And the symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome are those symptoms that the body gives us to stop us overspending energy. And so the starting point to treat is to make that energy bucket as large as we possibly can by looking at energy delivery mechanisms. And then we have ME. And in ME, we have all the symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome, that, as just described. But in ME and long COVID, because long COVID is just another form of ME, in ME, the immune system is very busy. Now, the immune system is our standing army. And as you know, standing armies require a lot of energy and they require a lot of raw materials. And if that immune system is busy for reasons of there's an invader, i.e. chronic infection, chronic viral infection, chronic bacterial infection, chronic fungal infection, then that will create symptoms of inflammation and it will require a lot of energy. So there's not enough energy left for us to have a life with. But the immune system may also be busy for very wrong reasons. It may be busy for reasons of allergy or autoimmunity. And using that army analogy, that's civil war. And civil war is very bad news because it's just self-destructive. It's not doing any good whatsoever. So in thinking about somebody who comes to me with chronic fatigue syndrome or ME or long COVID, first of all, I'm thinking, what are the energy delivery mechanisms? And we need to address those. And then we're asking the question, why is the immune system busy? Is it busy because you're allergic, dealing with the upper fermenting gut, dealing with chronic infection, bacteria, virus, or whatever? So that, as I call it, is the roadmap. And the key point to navigating your way along that roadmap are the road signs. And those road signs are symptoms. And this is why it's so dangerous to use symptom suppressing medication, because you lose those valuable clues that tell you you're going the wrong way. You don't know if you're tired and how much to pace and what to do and what not to do. And if you mask pain through symptom suppressing medication, then you don't know which part of the body is going wrong, and you don't know how to address that either. So the conventional medical approach is not conducive to treating chronic fatigue syndrome and ME. Most patients who go down that conventional path get very little benefit at all from the conventional approach. And that's why you need an ecological doctor, or at least somebody who is asking the question why. Why is the energy bucket so small? Why are energy delivery mechanisms so poor? And why do we have this immunological hole in that energy bucket?
Great, that is beautiful. So basically what you're saying is that there is a difference between chronic fatigue syndrome and ME, and that's that ME has the chronic fatigue syndrome symptoms, but there's also an immunological aspect to it. Is that correct?
There's chronic inflammation going on in the body, and the immune system is busy, which, as I say, takes energy and generates nasty symptoms. I mean, what are the symptoms of inflammation? Pain, heat, swelling, redness, and loss of function. And those are very nasty and very uncomfortable symptoms. And we have to have nasty and uncomfortable symptoms in order to make us make changes, because Western lives are addictive, they're comfortable, they're easy, but they're very damaging to us. And the most difficult thing to do is persuade people to put in place those changes they need to put in place in order to identify those root causes. And if you've got nasty symptoms, then you are better empowered to put in place those difficult things.
Yes, definitely. I love that you said that. So with long COVID, from what you're saying and what I'm understanding is that it could be manifesting as chronic fatigue syndrome, or it could be manifesting as also myalgic encephalomyelitis in addition to that. Is that correct?
Long COVID is ME, because long COVID, yes, you have chronic fatigue syndrome, but yes, you also have inflammation. And that inflammation is driven by that viral persistence, probably because the immune system is not dealing with that virus adequately.
Okay, interesting. That's great. So since we started along this path and talking about the energy bucket and all that good stuff, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here and ask if you could explain post-exertional malaise for us.
Okay.
Because you do such a great job of explaining it in the book. That's really the first time that I found something where I went, oh, okay. So if you could do it in two different ways for us.
Okay.
The first way is just in layman's terms, and then let's get into a little bit of the juiciness as far as the ATP and ADP and all that good stuff.
Okay. Post-exertional malaise is a pathological fatigue. Now, at the end of today, I've been seeing patients this morning, working this afternoon. I should be tired by the end of today, but I will have a night's sleep and I will be right as rain in the morning. The difference with people with chronic fatigue syndrome is they will push themselves to do what they can. They will have a night's sleep and they will pay for it the next day. They will pay for it the next day with worse fatigue and worse symptoms. And that is the basis of pacing. And it's an extension of a very simple principle. It's like an athlete who's in a state of chronic overtraining. And I'm quite sure that any athlete who's won a gold medal at the Olympic Games, the next day will have post-exertional fatigue because he has pushed his body so hard. He hasn't just used up all his energy reserves, he's caused some damage in the process. So post-exertional fatigue is pathological, and we want to avoid it because it actually stops you getting well. It slows the rate at which you recover. So now we have to ask, what is the mechanism of that? Now, what characterizes us warm-blooded mammals and birds and the like is we get energy from food, from carbohydrates and from fats through a process called aerobic metabolism, oxidative phosphorylation. And that is incredibly efficient. And from one molecule of acetate, and you can get that acetate group from ketones, from sugars, from fats, from one molecule of acetate, you can make about 36 molecules of ATP. Now you compare that to anaerobic metabolism, which is how yeast get their energy. That is getting energy without oxygen. And from one molecule of acetate, you can get just 2 molecules of ATP. So that is hopelessly inefficient. Now, the business of generating that energy is all about recycling a molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And we make that molecule by a process of oxidative phosphorylation. That molecule passes into the cell, and the energy is released when one of those phosphate bonds are broken. And so the ATP, the adenosine triphosphate, breaks down into adenosine DP, adenosine diphosphate, with the release of energy. And that diphosphate molecule is recycled. Now, if the pressure is really on, you've got to generate more energy, I'm running away from that saber-toothed tiger or whatever, the body can generate a little bit of extra energy by 2 molecules of ADP combining with 1 molecule of ATP, i.e. another hit of energy, and 1 molecule of AMP, that's the monophosphate. Now, the trouble with shuttling all our ATP into the monophosphate is that can't be recycled. And that's lost to the body. And what that means is that in order to be able to recover, the body has to make brand new ATP. Now, that it can do that, but it's a difficult bit of biochemistry. It's called the pentose phosphate shunt, and it's slow. It takes a long time. You can't do it overnight. So we wake up the next day and our energy bucket is small straight away. And that manifests with post-exertional malaise. Now, we can shortcut that to a certain extent, because in order to make brand new ATP, we make it from a 5-carbon sugar. Now, most sugars in nature are 6-carbon sugars. But if we provide the body with a 5-carbon sugar, and we do have one that's called D-ribose, then it can make new ATP much more quickly. So I do love to use D-ribose in my patients who are pathologically fatigued, but it is expensive. And the way I suggest they use it is don't use it all the time, because sugars are not good for the gut. They can be fermented. But if you have a day when you really know you've overdone it, and because it can't be helped, they're things you've just got to get done, then taking D-ribose at night is proven to ameliorate the post-exertional fatigue the next day.
That's great. That's great. So I have a personal question about D-ribose, and hopefully this will apply to some, I'm sure it will, to some other people out there. I know that when I take it, and I do have a corn allergy, I've tried to find D-ribose that is not derived from corn, and I have not so far. So I'm not sure if it's the corn allergy or what, but it does not do good things for me, the D-ribose.
You're absolutely right. That is one of the things that absolutely precludes some people from taking it. Those people that are very corn allergic can't tolerate D-ribose, and me too. I haven't found an alternative either. So what that means is you poor people don't have a rescue remedy when things go badly wrong, which is tiresome.
Let's make one. Let's find one.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So since we are going along these lines right now, and I think I know what you're going to say to this, but Rachel had a question saying most patients that she encounters with ME/CFS diagnosis have a low threshold of physical activities that they can do before they reach post-exertional malaise. And this really speaks to what you were talking about at the beginning. But for her, she seems to have a much higher threshold before PEM kicks in, doing physical things, right? So she's okay with doing most physical things except for aerobic, which we might be able to get to today or not, we'll see. But for her, post-exertional malaise is much more of a concern when doing cognitive tasks. So she is wondering if her diagnosis would still be chronic fatigue syndrome, or
it certainly is still, you've got a chronic fatigue syndrome. If you don't have that amount of energy to spend in a day compared to your peers, compared to similar people of similar ages, then you have a chronic fatigue syndrome. And it's a very interesting point that you put forward. Some people find they're much better mentally but terrible physically, and some people find it's the other way around. And I'm ashamed to say I don't know what the answer to that is. Although what is so interesting about the brain is the energy delivery mechanisms in the brain are different from the energy delivery mechanisms in the body. Now, the body is powered by mitochondria, almost exclusively. But in the brain, what's so interesting about the brain, and this is based on some research done by Silvia Rivero, a Spanish researcher, Italian researcher, which is that there are not enough mitochondria in the brain to account for all the energy that's spent in the brain. The brain's astonishing. Although it weighs just 2% of body weight, it burns up 20% of the energy that the whole body consumes. Now, there isn't room for 20% of the body's mitochondria to appear in the brain. And what is so fascinating is that the myelin sheaths that wrap themselves around nerve fibers, I'm sure you've seen electron micrographs of nerve fibers. You get an axon down the middle, and then there's these fatty membranes that wrap themselves around like a Swiss roll. And what's so fascinating is those fatty membranes, so the oligodendrocytes, have adopted mitochondrial biochemistry. And therefore, the ATP necessary for nerve conduction is created on site exactly where it's needed, which again is incredibly efficient. Nobody has explained to me how that came about in evolutionary biology, but that is the fact of the matter. Now, the brain, as you know, is largely made up of fat, and the myelin sheaths are fatty sheaths. And so they are making energy for the brain directly from the fat contained in those fatty Swiss rolls. So the brain is peculiarly dependent on fat for its energy supply, whereas in the short term, the body should be running on fat and ketones most of the time. It can take advantage of sugars and carbohydrates in the short term, and that effectively is rocket fuel. So all I can suggest is there's something there. We know the energy delivery to the mechanisms of the brain are different, slightly different from that to the body, and there must be something different about her pathways. But I would hate to speculate what that actually is. What would be fascinating is the starting point to treat chronic fatigue syndrome is, as I call it, get the fuel in the tank right. the energy delivery mechanisms, and I use a car analogy, there are 4 important players. You've got to have the right fuel in the tank. You have to have the mitochondrial engine, and we've discussed that a little bit. Then you have to have the thyroid accelerator pedal and the adrenal gearbox. And what I also know is you have to address those things in the right order. You've got to get the fuel in the tank right first, because without the right fuel in the tank, no engine is ever going to work. Then you tackle the mitochondrial engine, and then you can look at the control mechanisms, the thyroid accelerator pedal and the adrenal gearbox. And it has to be that way around, because the thyroid and the adrenal glands, their effects are through their control of mitochondria. So the thyroid gland determines how fast the mitochondria go. And to a certain extent, the thyroid gland also determines the number of mitochondria, i.e. not how fast your engine goes, but also the size of your engine. And guess what? We all would like to have a big engine. And then the adrenal gland manifests on a second-to-second, minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour basis, matching energy requirements to energy delivery. Because if you don't match very carefully, energy will be wasted. So in the winter, for example, when we should be going into hibernation and we can't grow crops in the field and we can only hunt occasionally, we need to shut down energy production. We need to conserve it. We need to keep warm. We need to hibernate so we can survive the winter. And then when the spring comes along, the summer, when we have to be out there hunting, we have to be out there planting, we have to be out there harvesting, then we need more energy to be able to do all those things. And the adrenal glands and the thyroid glands allow us to match those 2 things very carefully in a way that energy is not wasted and fuel and food is not wasted. But the starting point, the fuel that our mitochondria prefer to run on and run most efficiently on are ketones. And that's why, for me, the starting point to treat all cases of chronic fatigue is the paleo ketogenic diet. It's ketogenic because we need to run on ketones, i.e. very low carbohydrate. And it's paleo because dairy products and gluten grains drive so much other pathology. They're very common allergens. And guess what? If you've got allergens that you're consuming, you will cause inflammation, and that's civil war. That then starts tipping you into the ME side of things because you get the inflammation symptoms. So the paleo ketogenic diet is intrinsically anti-inflammatory. And that is the starting point. And when people say to me, well, why the paleo ketogenic diet? Why do you stumble on that? And whenever you have difficult questions, always look to evolution and evolutionary biology. Humans evolved over hundreds of thousands, nay, millions of years eating a paleo ketogenic diet. Now, then people turn around to me and say, oh, yes, but they found primitive man and they found he was eating pulses and he was eating grains and he was eating fruit. And the answer is, yes, he was, but only for a very limited window of time. He was eating those foods in the autumn, because in the autumn, we get free food, we get a harvest, we get a windfall. And by consuming those foods in an addictive manner and getting fat as a result, that's survival value for the winter. That's our own personal pantry that allows us to survive the winter when foods are short, and also is insulating. It keeps us warm during the winter. So getting fat is a vital evolutionary tool to allow us to survive. Now, primitive man gave up his carbohydrates when the winter came because he had no choice. He ate carbohydrates in the autumn because the carbohydrates switched on an addiction gene, so he couldn't stop eating them. He ate and he ate and he ate. And that explains much of modern health problems, because we eat carbohydrates now all year round because we can. The addiction gene is switched on. We can't stop eating them. We get overweight, we get fat, we get fatigue, we get fermenting guts, we get foggy brains, and all the problems associated with constant carbohydrate consumption. So the PK diet, the starting point is get into ketosis, get off the sugars and the carbohydrates and the dairies and the gluten grains. But once you're in ketosis, of course, you can have a party. Of course, you can have a feast. Of course, you can have a jolly and go and eat all those things that you shouldn't be. And that's not going to do you any harm at all, because the body is well able to cope with that. The key is you've got to get back into ketosis after that great celebration, after that great jolly, after that great holiday, and the body will get back to normality.
I, you just explained that absolutely perfectly. So, gosh, this is amazing. So actually, this goes into a question that I had as well. I have recently really had to go carnivore, so eating only meats and fats from animals, so no plants whatsoever, because I'd gotten to the place where, and this happened, so I had chronic fatigue syndrome about 20 years ago, severely for 8 years, and finally found my way out of it. And now I do have a mild version, a very mild version of long COVID. But what I was finding was that the vegetables that I was eating were giving me inflammation. So I just went completely carnivore, and it is fascinating. It's a whole movement that's happening right now. I'm sure you're aware of it. And what you said really speaks to it, in that many years ago, during the winter, all we could do was hunt. There were no plants to harvest or eat or consume. And the fruit thing as well, we didn't have access to that year round. So my question to you is, well, I guess just overall, what do you think of the carnivore diet year round? I I'm still up in the air about that. I think that it might be therapeutic for some people, but yeah, carnivore diet year round. And then also, how do you address people who are vegetarians and vegans? I've had a couple of people in my classes and things like that, and they have started consuming, animal products. So
Well, the first point is I entirely share the vegetarians and the vegans' concerns for animal welfare. And in that respect, I'm completely on side. I am incredibly privileged because I live in a small holding. I grow all my own fruit and vegetables. I've got my own pigs. I've got my own chickens. I've got my own ducks. So all the animal meat I had are animals which I've loved and which have had a life and which have had a good death, I hope. But that's the first point. The second point is the purely carnivorous diet is entirely healthy. There's very little wrong with it. And people can remain and have remained extremely fit for many years just eating a pure carnivorous diet. So I have no concerns about that whatsoever. People might say, well, it's a bit boring. There isn't the variety there that I would like to have. But if that's what you need to be healthy, then that's what you do. But I would like to think that by dint of doing that diet for some time and maybe detox regime and taking some supplements or whatever, the gut will heal. And at the point at which the gut heals, then yes, of course, you can tolerate some other foods. And they bring pleasure to our lives. And so that's what you do. But the real bad foods are the simple carbohydrates, the sugars and the fruit sugars, because they can be fermented in the upper gut. Now, as we age, the ability of our digestion to digest everything isn't quite as good as when we're young. That's why young people can get away with blue murder. As Oscar Wilde put it, youth is wasted on the young. So if we get into a situation where we overwhelm our ability to deal with carbohydrates in the upper gut, then we will start to ferment them instead. Now, the fermenting gut is very bad news and drives a lot of pathology for lots of reasons. The first thing, the upper gut is supposed to be a sterile, acidic, digesting gut to allow us to deal with proteins and fats. Yes, the lower gut is a fermenting gut, but that's full of friendly bacteria to digest fiber. Problems arise if the upper gut starts to ferment sugars and carbohydrates. What happens then? They get fermented to toxic products like alcohol, D-lactate, hydrogen sulfide, ammoniacal compounds, all of which causes poisoning. It's also been described as the auto-brewery syndrome. If you get a buildup of bacteria or yeast in the gut, then they produce their own toxins, and that's called bacterial endotoxin or fungal mycotoxin. And all these things have the ability to poison us. Worse than that, when you start taking nutritional supplements for support your mitochondria, whatever, those bacteria and fungi are first in the line. You just feed the bugs, and that can make you ferment even harder. And worse than that, you then don't get the benefit or the full benefit that you should be getting from the nutritional supplements. And then, of course, there's another problem here. At medical school, we are taught, yes, the gut is full of bacteria and there they stay. Not true. Some of those microbes will get into the bloodstream. One example of this, if you brushed your teeth and did a blood test 2 minutes later, you will find dental bacteria in the bloodstream. And of course, that's why dentists are always so worried about people who have heart disease and insist on them taking antibiotics before any dental procedure. So these bacteria do get into the bloodstream. Now, if they are friendly bacteria from the large bowel that the immune system's been looking at for hundreds of thousands of years, it says, oh, that's okay, off you go. You can go on your way quite safely. But if these are abnormal bacteria that we are not familiar with, that the immune system, they're new kids on the block, they're new microbes, they will get maybe stuck in our connective tissue, in our muscles, in our bones, and they will drive pathology. You'll get inflammatory reactions. And I'm quite sure that much of fibromyalgia is allergy to microbes in the fermenting gut. We know much arthritis is driven by microbes in the fermenting gut. Chronic urticaria, I suspect, is driven by microbes in the fermenting gut. Polymyalgia rheumatica, temporal arteritis, all these inflammatory conditions are driven by microbes in the fermenting gut. And again, this is why the paleo-ketogenic diet is also the starting point to treat any condition associated with inflammation, because the immune system is busy. And guess what? We know that. We know that from microbiology, because if you look at the gut, you will find that 90% of the immune system is gut associated, and it is there to protect us from all those bacteria in the gut, which could get into the bloodstream and cause septicemia. In fact, I remember listening to the radio a little while ago of a very lovely lady who worked at a hospital looking after the terminally ill. And she said, I knew when somebody was about to die because I could smell it. I could smell them. And at that point, the energy delivery mechanisms are so awful that the immune system in the gut cannot contain those microbes in the gut. They get into the bloodstream and they start the process of decomposition. And she said, I can tell within hours when somebody's going to die because, as I say, I can smell it. So it's just a lovely illustration of what goes on when we eat the wrong foods. And the other very interesting statistic here is that the venous drainage of the gut, it doesn't go straight into the systemic bloodstream. It all drains via the portal vein to the liver. And the liver is an enormous sorting box that has to sort out the product of the fermentation, the bacterial endotoxin, the fungal exotoxin, the natural lectins that are in foods, the toxins that are naturally present in foods, and so on. And that requires a huge amount of energy. In fact, at rest, the liver uses as much energy as the brain and the heart combined. 27% of the whole body's energy just goes to the liver to sort out that toxic load. So if you reduce that toxic load by doing a paleo-ketogenic diet and maybe taking vitamin C to bowel tolerance, that's another of my favorite tools, you greatly reduce the work of the liver. If you greatly reduce the work of the liver, you've got more energy to have a life with. You've got more energy to spend on physical things, on mental things, on emotional things. But if you're constantly poisoning yourself with food, then you're going to slow down the body for lots of reasons.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So, this, we already know what the answer is to this question, but I did have someone send this in. So I'd like for you to just drive it home a little bit more. So the question is, I'm wondering how much I need to change my diet. Do I really need to give up gluten, dairy, and sugar?
Absolutely. Those are three big baddies. So the answer is yes, yes, yes. Now, we do have some very useful tools to help us. I'm very enthusiastic of ketone breath meters, which allow you to tell us when you're in ketosis. And that's very helpful. You have to use them responsibly, though, because they're measuring ketones in parts per million. And they also cross-react with alcohol. It's a similar technology that's used for alcohol breath testing on the roads that the police use. The point here is if you've got a fermenting gut and you're fermenting to produce alcohol, it look as if you're blowing ketones when you're absolutely not in ketosis. So you have to use them with a little bit of circumspection. But that is very helpful. It tells you when you have done the diet well enough. Generally speaking, men can get into ketosis more easily than women can. And as you improve and as you get better, you will tolerate more carbohydrates because you can use them as a fuel and eat a few more carbohydrates and stay in ketosis. But as I say, you have to be in ketosis all your life. If I go and have a giggle and a party with my friends, yeah, of course I eat all the wrong things. I have a jolly time, and I don't feel quite so well the next morning, but it doesn't kill me. So there is plenty of scope to enjoy life, and also get the best out of life, and also live to our full potential.
Perfect. So let's see, I'm going to take a look at my questions here because there was a beautiful flow that was happening, so I wanted to stick with that. Can you hear me okay still?
Perfect, no problem at all.
Okay, great, perfect. So, yes, so I love, well, actually, since we're still talking about diet, do you use intermittent fasting or extended fasting when you're working with patients?
It's very individual and very personal. I mean, again, the starting point of this, back to primitive man, did he have 3 meals a day? No, of course he didn't. There's lots of lovely work, especially done with dementia patients. And in dementia, that is so much about poor energy delivery mechanisms to the brain, that to eat all your food within a 10-hour window of time is a very good habit to get into, i.e. your gut has at least 12, 14 hours a day to heal and repair and to recover. One of the problems of people snacking all the time and having a bit here and a bit there is the stomach is never empty. It's always working. It never has a chance to really clean itself up. So that's the first principle. I do like people to eat their food within a 10-hour window. So that usually means breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning and then supper at 5 or 5:30. And then I think it's very helpful to fast 1 day a week. And that's what I do as a routine. I do it on a Friday. Friday is a fasting day. And again, that's very easy because I have my supper on the Thursday. I wake up, I don't bother with breakfast. I skip breakfast. I don't eat lunch anyway. And I don't snack. And then I have my supper on a Friday. And the interesting thing about fasting days is if I know I've got a busy day or I've got to use my brain or whatever, I make sure that's a fasting day because the brain works much better when you are fasting. Now, people are terrified of fasting because they are terrified of the social opprobrium that goes with it. Oh, are you all right? Are you feeling well? You on chemotherapy or something if you start fasting? And the second thing is fear of hunger. Now, once you are keto adapted, you never have to fear hunger again. You might feel a bit, I feel greedy. I feel like something to eat, a bit rumbly, but you don't get an energy dive. You don't get a foggy brain. One of the things I tell my patients is the samurai warriors, before a day of fighting, they would fast for 24 hours. And that would make them more effective fighters with quicker reflexes. So fasting is a very, very useful therapeutic tool. And it's a completely safe thing to do. Side effects, 0. And guess what? On fasting days, I've got more time. Why? I don't have to cook. I don't have to eat. I don't have to wash up. I don't have to go shopping. So look on the bright side. But for many people, fasting is helpful, and especially for losing weight. Now, people want to talk endlessly about weight loss or trying to lose weight. And the one thing that we know for certain is that calorie restriction doesn't work. Starving yourself doesn't work. Why? Because the brain thinks, oh, crumbs, we're in starvation mood. We're in winter. In that case, we'll shut down calorie burning. Otherwise, we'll starve to death. So you might lose weight for the first few days. But then as the body and the brain shut down calorie burning, your weight stays exactly the same. You go back onto your usual diet and the weight comes straight back on again. So guaranteed, calorie restriction doesn't work. So to lose weight, do not calorie restrict. But what you can do is a 5-2 regime or maybe a 6-1 regime. So you eat your normal calories and you calculate that. There's an equation you can use to calculate your normal calories that you normally consume and make sure you're in ketosis. And then you have 1 day or possibly 2 days where you either severely calorie restrict or maybe you fast completely. Now, the point is, there's a certain inertia in the body about calorie burning. You won't shut down calorie burning over 2 days. You will burn your normal amount of calories that you normally expect to burn. And then, of course, you go straight back to eating your normal calories a day. And that means in the course of the week, you eat 2/7 of what you normally eat, and you will be guaranteed to lose weight. And it works every time. You don't get hungry, you don't run out of energy, you don't get a foggy brain, you don't get low and depressed and anxious because you're not losing weight. It works brilliantly well. Now, I said it never fails. There is one proviso, and that is you've got to have the thyroid function there to fat burn. And a very common problem I see in my chronic fatigue syndrome patients is what I call ketogenic hypoglycemia. Now, this was first described in the 1960s by pediatricians, because in the 1960s, the treatment for epilepsy in children was a ketogenic diet. Ketogenic diet, get rid of their fit, worked brilliantly well. And most of the kids adapted the diet perfectly well. A few of them didn't. A few of them kept saying, oh, I'm tired, oh, I'm hungry, what can I do? They didn't know what it was, but what they found was that the children grew out of it. Now, my guess is that those are the children, ones who are hypothyroid, and children, of course, are much better at recovering and growing new thyroids and adrenal glands and hearts and lungs and so on, and they just grew up and grew their own thyroid, but whatever's necessary to deal with the situation. Of course, that's not going to happen with my mature chronic fatigue syndrome patients. And if, despite doing the keto diet, they continue to get their hypoglycemia symptoms, that is called ketogenic hypoglycemia. They are using adrenaline to fat burn because they don't have the thyroid hormones to fat burn. And of course, what you have to remember is that the symptoms of low blood sugar are not symptoms of low blood sugar. They're the adrenaline response to those symptoms. Adrenaline is poured out to make you go and eat something else, do some fat burning or whatever to escape from it. In fact, as often as not, I have patients who come and see me here and we do their routine bloods and off they go. And the lab will phone me in the evening. Oh, that patient's blood sugar is dangerously low. You know, they've got a blood sugar of 1.9 or 2.3 or something. You know, you better get some sugar into them quickly. No, they're in ketosis. They're burning fat quite happily. They have no idea their blood sugar is running at 1.3. It doesn't cause them any symptoms at all, and they can function as normal. So getting into ketosis is so important for our equilibrium. It stops the wobbly blood sugar levels, which stops the wobbly insulin levels and the wobbly adrenaline levels, which cause so many problems to us in our day-to-day life. So yeah, the ketogenic diet is the starting point.
Absolutely fascinating. And I have so many other questions that are coming up, but not for right now. I'm having to censor myself there. I did want to ask about coffee and chocolate. Now, I have a bias here because both coffee and chocolate give me fits, even just straight 100% cacao. And what I'm seeing with some people's recommendations for people who are even doing an elimination type of diet is coffee's okay. And I have a little bit of a problem with that. Now, I know that you have times where you say it's okay to do, and then other times where you say it's not. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Okay, well, the point here is that, as I say to all my patients, I can't micromanage you from hour to hour, day to day. And the only way you're going to get well is you've got to become your own doctor, because there aren't enough people like you and me out there to, you know, micromanage them from day to day. So as I say to my patients, my job is to give you the rules of the game and the tools of the trade to sort yourself out. And the PK diet, actually, it's not the starting point. Actually, it's the finishing point. For you, you have found that your starting point is a carnivorous diet with no coffee and no chocolate. But I would like to think that, you know, as you improve, as your body recovers, as your detox enzymes improve, you will be able to tolerate a bit of coffee. you will be able to, as you switch off inflammation, you will be able to tolerate a little bit of chocolate in the future. And guess what? Those are pleasurable. I thoroughly enjoy my coffee. I thoroughly enjoy my bit of chocolate. Now I know I'm an addict. I know I'm a terrible sugar addict, and I deal with that by having no sugar at all. Because if I have one bit of sugar, I want the whole pot. So that's that. But I know I can happily have a cup of coffee. That's my little cup of coffee which I have with my breakfast. Maybe one at 11 o'clock, and that's fine. It doesn't disturb my sleep. It doesn't upset me. It's a great pleasure to me, and I would hate to give that up. So I hear exactly what you're saying, and believe me, you are not the only person in the world that can't tolerate caffeine and cannot tolerate chocolate. But I would like to think that as you improve, you will be able to enjoy those things in the future as the body heals and repairs with all the things that we're doing.
Great. So yeah, because sorry, there's some feedback there. So because when I work with people in the online course that I teach or clients one-on-one, at the beginning I say absolutely no caffeine, no chocolate, no alcohol, none of that. Let's keep it clean to start off with. But that is the goal, I think, for a lot of people who do carnivore diets and even paleo ketogenic, is like you said, that we can go out and how did you put it? It was so wonderful. We can go out and have a giggle with our friends and and occasionally have some stuff that we wouldn't normally have. So yeah, that's awesome. I love origin stories, like superheroes, and so I'm wondering how you got involved with chronic fatigue syndrome and myalgic encephalomyelitis and these types of illnesses. What drew you to those?
Well, what got me interested in the whole business was I myself discovered I was dairy allergic. And it happened when I was breastfeeding my oldest daughter. She had the most awful colic. It was nowhere to be found in the textbook. I was told, oh, she'll grow out of it at 13 weeks. But that didn't help me when she was screaming her heart out, all night, every night, a few days, a few weeks of age. It was agony. Now, again, I still can't remember to this day what made me give up the dairy products, but I did. And not only did her colic disappear instantly, but so did my chronic rhinitis, snotty nose, and asthma. And again, nowhere was that to be found in the medical textbooks. And at that point, I suddenly realized that medical education is not an education at all. It's a brainwashing. And, nowhere in my medical education are we properly taught to think causation. And nowadays, it's even worse. I can tell you, because I was chatting with a medical student recently, medicine is boiling down to simple algorithms. Headache is paracetamol deficiency, take the drugs. High cholesterol is statin deficiency, take the drugs. Depression is SSRI deficiency, take the drugs. That's what it's all about. Nobody is thinking mechanisms. Now, nowhere was this more apparent than in the world of chronic fatigue syndrome and ME. In fact, in the early 1980s, I remember reading a statistic then that tired all the time symptom was accounted for 40% of all general practice consultations. Fatigue is very common. Now, patients don't even bother to go with doctors with chronic fatigue syndrome because they know they're not going to get any sort of answer at all. And so it was during the early 1980s that I really started thinking mechanism. What is going on here? What do those symptoms mean? What are the mechanisms of those symptoms, and how can we resolve them? And because I seemed to be one of the very few that was thinking about chronic fatigue syndrome, I tended to attract a lot of patients with chronic fatigue syndrome and ME. And in the early days, I can promise you, I really didn't know what I was doing. But at least I had the honesty to say, I don't know what I'm doing. We're on this journey together, and you learn some clues and I'll learn some clues, and we'll see if we can move things on a bit. So here we are, kind of 40 years down the line after that, and I'm starting to recognize some of the symptoms. I was going to say, if any of your listeners want to read a nice, easy book, I've just produced that book there, which is called The Energy Equation.
Oh, amazing.
It's just the layman's, easy chit chat, a few nice little stories in there, explanation of how anybody and everybody can improve their energy. And these techniques apply just as much to the athletes as they do to the normal person. So the difference between me and an Olympic an athlete is the same difference between me and somebody bedbound with ME or chronic fatigue syndrome. The treatment regimes are identical. Improve energy delivery mechanisms with diet, supplements, fermenting gut, di-da. And all of those things are all natural remedies. You know, you're not going to be blood tested and found to be cheating because you're running in ketosis or whatever. And in fact, the ketogenic diet is most applicable for middle distance and endurance athleticism, not the sprinters or the weightlifters. I mean, I don't pretend to have any expertise in athletics, but if you're a sprinter, I'd say train on a ketogenic diet and then maybe sugar load just before you're about to compete, so you get that final bit of rocket fuel that gives you the edge. But for the middle distance runners and the marathon runners, no question, you can improve your performance by getting onto a ketogenic diet. Because just a very simple thing, if you're running on carbohydrates, you store carbohydrates in your liver and your muscle as glycogen. Glycogen holds water, it has an osmotic pressure. And just by going into ketosis, you'll lose about 2 kilograms of fluid over a couple of days. Now, if you're an athlete, 2 kilograms makes a big difference to your ability to perform. If you had to run carrying extra 2 kilograms, you wouldn't have the same ability as if just being that little bit lighter is a help. But also, if you can get your fuel from fats, you're never going to run out of fuel during your running. In fact, the guy who holds the world record for the furthest distance run in 24 hours is called Mike Morton. In 24 hours, he ran 172 miles. Did he need to eat? No, he didn't. He obviously had some fluids, he had some electrolytes, but he just ran 172 miles on fat. So it's the perfect fuel for the middle distance and the long distance athletes.
Very interesting. So he was kind of the Forrest Gump of the.
I bet in that film, Forrest Gump wasn't running on ketones. I think they just took lots and lots of pictures and stuck them together.
There might be something to that. So one of my fellow CFSers, she doesn't have long COVID, but she said, and she's very familiar with your work, she said, I know that you grow much of your own food. Do you grow your vegetables no dig? So this is a very specific.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
well, the garden is split in two, and half the garden is permaculture, which yes is no dig, and so that the plants are there constantly. But I try not to turn the soil over. So in the winter, I'm lucky I've got horses and pigs, so I just put the muck straight on the ground, and then I till it, because there's a love. I learned this from a wonderful organic farmer who lives in Shropshire, and he wrote a book called The Farmer, the Devil and the Plough, and he detailed how damaging it is to turn soil over, because all those microbes that are used to living at a foot down don't like living on the surface, and vice versa. So yes, so the top half of the garden, which is permaculture, is never turned over. The bottom half of the garden, which is annual crops, like obviously brassicas, root vegetables, maybe salad vegetables. That's we just put muck on the surface and just shake it in, so we don't dig in that respect. I mean, I dig, just lift it to remove weeds, obviously, but I don't turn the soil over.
Great, amazing little side step there. So last subject really here is, and this is, of course, linked to everything that we've been talking about, but how do you recommend people start to be physically active again, and at what point? So, and then another part of that question is, and I did experience this myself, but I've been hearing from and getting questions from several people who say, hey, I started feeling good for 3 weeks or even 2 months, and then something happened, maybe they overdid it or something that they don't even know what happened, and then they feel like they're back at square one. And of course, we know that they're not actually back at square one, but it feels like that.
Okay.
Well, so, yeah.
The first point is that all these regimes, you will get reactions to them, and I call them DDD reactions: diet, die-off, and detox reactions. Diet reactions, as you change your diet, it's difficult getting from sugar burning into fat burning. You often get allergic reactions because allergies and addictions are very similar. And if you cut out a food, then you can get withdrawal symptoms from that. So you will get those odd, funny diet reactions. Again, as you change your diet, you will get detox reactions because, as for example, you kill off microbes in the fermenting gut, you get allergic reactions maybe to bacterial parts. You will mobilize chemicals from your fat and give yourself an acute poisoning. So that's another possibility. And you can get die-off reactions, otherwise known as Herxheimer reactions. So again, the starting point to treat any chronic infection is to starve it out with a ketogenic diet. Bacteria and yeast love sugar. And if you deprive them of sugar, then you will start to kill them off. And you can then get allergic reactions to those dead microbes. So that's the first point. The next point is, yes, it's very tempting when you've got some energy, think, great, I'll get this done, I'll get that done, I'll get the other done. And then you overdo things and then you feel like you're back to square one. You're not back to square one, but the pacing has to continue throughout the recovery phase. And guess what? I think I'm fairly healthy, but I still pace my life. I used to sort of work from 5 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night. I don't do that anymore. I get to my desk for 7:30. By 4 o'clock, that's it. I've had enough. I'm going to go out and enjoy myself and go for a walk or pot in the garden or whatever. So activities do have to be paced. And the key is post-exertional malaise. I will have, this will be a busy day for me one way or another, but I will have a good night's sleep. And next morning, I'll be ready to go again, full of enthusiasm and energy to get on with all the things. And that tells me I didn't overdo it the day before. But, as you probably know, I'm endlessly being done by the General Medical Council. If I have a day in court there, defending myself, I'm absolutely exhausted by the end of the day and still a bit tired the next. So, you know from your own experience, you know what you can do, what you can't do. And you just live your life within those constraints. My job is to make those constraints as big as possible so that, you can get, worthwhile and lots of things done in the day, but you have to work at it. And I do all the things that I ask my chronic fatigue syndrome patients to do. I eat a paleo ketogenic diet. I cheat sometimes, but that's because I like to have a giggle with my friends sometimes. I do the detox regimes every week. I take a good package of basic supplements. I take vitamin Teitelbaum tolerance to deal with the fermenting gut, and so on and so forth. And I think that as any therapist has to lead by example. And I run a mentoring group for doctors who are interested in this approach. And one of the things I say to them is, you've got to do these regimes yourself. There's no good you sitting there spherical in a chair with no energy and expecting your patients to do the same thing. You've got to lead by example. And the important part about that is it really makes you think about the diet and what you can eat. And it really makes you stumble over the practical, problems of doing this right or that wrong or whatever. And therefore you're in a better position to be able to advise your patients. So you've got to walk the walk if you're going to talk the talk.
Preach. I totally agree there. So is there a certain amount of time that you would say people should know that they are doing well before they go back to work, before they attempt to do regular exercise? A lot of people are having trouble with, they have long COVID, and of course it's completely new to them, this whole thing that you and I are talking about. They're trying to figure out when they can go back to work.
Well, so, I hate to give any prognostic indications. I would hate to say to any patient, you'll be fine in 4 months, you'll be fine in 6 months or whatever, because there's massive disappointment when that isn't achieved. And again, if you say that, then people think all I've got to do is hang on in there for 6 months and I'll be well. And it's not like that. So I always avoid saying that. And I just, because it depends how long they've been ill for, and what their starting off point was, how old they are, what's the nature. Every patient is individual. As I say, I can give you the rules of the game and the tools of the trade, and you've got to go and play the game yourself. I'm a cricket fan. You probably don't know what cricket is, but it's a bit like baseball. But, I can, they all play by the same rules. They have the same tools, but I can recognize all those players as different from how they, how they play, how they throw the ball, how they hit the ball, whatever. They all have their unique style. And it's exactly the same in recovering from any illness, any disease. Everybody will find their own path, but given those rules and those tools, they can find that path safely, effectively, and hopefully the shortest possible route.
Perfect. Yes. So we're gonna start to wrap things up here. Just real quickly. Well, actually, you already went through this. I love it. We answered that. I was about to say, how do we prioritize what to address first? But you already went through that. So basically, it's diet. We go with diet first, right? What are we using as our fuel? And then those other 5 things that you were talking about in that order. Great. Perfect. So yes, what if people want to work with you, what is the best way to do that? I know you have a couple of different options.
Well, what has been incredibly popular, in fact, I spent the whole day yesterday, is I do online workshops by Zoom. And yesterday we had 2 people from America, we had somebody from Norway and a couple from Australia. So anybody can join up. And I max out at 20 people. And I discuss the basic working startup for treating anybody with chronic fatigue syndrome, anybody with ME, all the things that they have to do. And I don't work with any PowerPoints. I just sit and talk. And at any point, anybody can wave at me, stop me, ask me a question. I don't get this, I don't get that. And they have been very well received because, as I say, the stuff I'm talking about is simple medicine that anybody can do. And to access that, if you go onto my website, just Google Dr. Myhill and it comes up. And there it says the workshops, and you can buy a ticket for the day. And I start talking at 9:30 in the morning, and I finish talking at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. As you can see, I'm gobby, I'm a good talker, and anybody can ask any question. And I get some lovely feedback from that. People, once they really grasp those principles, they can run with it, and they can do very well.
That's amazing that you offer that. Ooh, crazy feedback. So I want to wrap things up with a quote from your book, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. I read this and I went, this is it right here. You said it's always cheering to remember that the body wants to get well. If one only has 49% of the package in place, then one is still on the slippery slope downhill. If one gets 51% in place, then the body is on the way to recovery.
Yeah.
I just paraphrased that. I don't mind how long it takes to recover so long as movement is in the right direction. And then this wonderful Winnie the Pooh quote, there is no hurry. We shall get there someday. And that's also in your book.
That's right. And what I can also tell my patients is that all these things they are doing will stop them dying from cancer, from dementia, and from heart disease. So their best years are ahead of them, and they will live a long and healthy life. So don't despair. Just, as my daughter put it, just get your shit together. That's not me, that's my daughter, okay? That's another quote.
Well, that's the perfect, yes, that is the perfect ending place there. Dr. Myhill, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Gosh, and I hope that, people are going to find your information, and I'm going to share this with lots of people. And yeah, just thank you so much.